2 years before he died, Allan Coe recorded a song called Live Forever. At the time, it sounded like one more joke from a man who had spent his entire career laughing in the face of danger. He had survived crashes, illnesses, surgeries, and countless setbacks. People had started to believe he really was impossible to bring down. But on April 29, 2026, that long-running joke came to an end. Coe died in an intensive care unit in Daytona Beach, Florida, at the age of 86. His family confirmed his passing, but they never shared a detailed explanation of what finally took his life. For someone who had cheated death so many times before, the silence only made the ending feel even more mysterious. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. His death wasn't the greatest mystery surrounding Allan Coe. The biggest mystery had been hiding in plain sight for decades. As news of his passing spread, tributes poured in from across the music world. Willie Nelson, Kid Rock, Hank Williams Jr., Hank Williams III, Chris Stapleton, Eric Church, Tanya Tucker, and many more honored a man whose influence stretched across generations of country music. Yet behind every tribute stood a complicated truth. Allan Coe had spent more than 50 years carefully building an image that mixed fact with fiction so well that even lifelong fans struggled to separate one from the other. The legend became almost bigger than the man himself. And the biggest part of that legend was a story that simply wasn't true. So how did one made-up tale become the foundation of an entire career? In 2024, roughly 2 years before his death, Coe teamed up with Hank Williams III and Hardy to record Live Forever. The title perfectly matched the image he had created over the years. By then, he had survived a brutal car accident, a frightening health scare first believed to be a stroke, knee replacement surgery in his late 70s, and a devastating battle with COVID that left him on oxygen and unable to eat normally. Every time people feared the worst, he recovered. Every time someone counted him out, he found his way back onto a stage. Looking back now, that song feels less like a joke and more like a strange prediction. But to understand why people believed he could survive anything, you first have to understand the story he wanted everyone to believe about his past. For years, Allan Coe claimed he had once sat on death row after killing another inmate in prison. According to his version, he had acted in self-defense after being attacked. It was a shocking story. It made him sound fearless, dangerous, and larger than life. Reporters repeated it. Fans accepted it. The tale became one of the defining pieces of his outlaw image. There was only one problem. It never happened. Years later, researchers dug into official prison records and found no evidence that Coe had ever been sentenced to death or convicted of killing another inmate. His real criminal record existed, but it involved offenses like burglary-related charges and possession of indecent materials, not murder. Yet even after the truth surfaced, Coe rarely admitted the story was false. So why keep telling it? Because by then, the myth had already done exactly what it was supposed to do. Oddly enough, the real story didn't need much embellishment. Allan Coe's childhood was difficult enough on its own. He was sent to a reform school when he was only 9 years old, long before most children had even finished elementary school. Instead of a normal childhood, he spent years moving through juvenile facilities and correctional institutions across Ohio. As a young man, he landed in the Ohio State Penitentiary on charges tied to auto theft and armed robbery. Prison became the place where his future unexpectedly began. Behind those walls, he taught himself to play guitar and started writing songs. Other inmates encouraged him to keep going, believing music could become a way out. After spending much of his youth locked up, he was finally released for good in 1967. But freedom didn't immediately lead to success. In fact, what happened next sounds almost unbelievable. When Coe arrived in Nashville, he had little more than a guitar and determination. He had no money, no powerful connections, and nowhere permanent to live. For a time, he slept inside a hearse parked outside the famous Ryman Auditorium. Every day he looked at the stage where country legends performed while he stood outside singing for spare change. It must have seemed impossible that he would ever belong inside those walls. Then something changed. Producer Shelby Singleton noticed him performing and offered him a recording contract with Plantation Records. His first album, Penitentiary Blues, drew directly from his years behind bars. It didn't make him an overnight star, but it got people talking. Soon afterward, respected producer and publisher Pete Drake signed him as a songwriter. That opportunity would shape the rest of his career. But success didn't come in the way most people expected. By the mid-1970s, David Allan Coe had transformed himself into one of country music's most recognizable characters. He wore sparkling rhinestone suits, grew his hair long, and often appeared in a Lone Ranger-style mask. The rhinestone outfits came from fellow performer Mel Tillis, who generously passed along part of his wardrobe. The mask, however, came from advice his father once gave him. He said the Lone Ranger could move unnoticed only because people recognized the mask instead of the man beneath it. Coe embraced that idea completely. The mysterious look became part of his identity. Albums like The Mysterious Rhinestone Cowboy and Long-Haired Redneck cemented his place in the growing outlaw country movement alongside names like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. But here's the catch. While Coe insisted he belonged among the biggest stars, his career never quite reached the same commercial heights. Why not? One reason is that some of David Allan Coe's greatest songs became far bigger hits for other people. He wrote Would You Lay With Me, in a Field of Stone, which became a #1 hit for Tanya Tucker. He also wrote Take This Job and Shove It, which Johnny Paycheck turned into one of the biggest country songs of the decade, even inspiring a feature film. Coe certainly had successful recordings of his own. You Never Even Called Me By My Name became a fan favorite. The Ride remains one of his signature songs, telling the unforgettable story of meeting the ghost of Hank Williams on a lonely highway. Mona Lisa Lost Her Smile climbed near the top of the charts. Yet despite these successes, the songwriter inside him often earned more respect than the performer standing at the microphone. And another controversy was about to make his public image even more complicated. Throughout his career, Coe attracted criticism that extended far beyond his prison stories. His 1986 album Son of the South featured Confederate imagery that sparked immediate backlash. Around the same time, he released a pair of X-rated albums sold mainly through mail order because of their explicit content. Critics accused the material of promoting racism, homophobia, and degrading views of women. Reviews were harsh, and many people believed the music crossed lines that should never have been crossed. Coe defended himself by claiming the songs reflected experiences and characters from prison life rather than his personal beliefs. He also pointed to friendships he had formed with inmates of different backgrounds. Still, many listeners remained unconvinced. The debate followed him for the rest of his life. Was he simply provoking people for attention, or did the songs reveal something deeper? Even today, opinions remain sharply divided. While arguments over his music continued, his body kept enduring one challenge after another. In 2013, a serious car crash left him with broken ribs, bruised kidneys, and head injuries. Many thought his touring days were over. Instead, he returned to performing only weeks later. In 2018, doctors first feared he had suffered a stroke before discovering the real problem was a severe ear infection. In 2019, he underwent knee replacement surgery and recovered quickly. Then came 2021, when COVID nearly claimed his life. At 82 years old, he spent weeks hospitalized, relying on oxygen and intravenous feeding. Fans feared they were witnessing the final chapter. Once again, he recovered. Every comeback strengthened the legend that David Allan Coe simply refused to lose. But while his health bounced back, another problem quietly grew in the background. Money became one of the biggest battles of his later years. In 2003, Coe filed for bankruptcy. During that difficult period, he sold the rights to every song he had written before 1984 for a reported $25,000, a tiny fraction of what many believed the catalog was actually worth. Later, he claimed he hadn't fully understood the agreement and blamed missing financial records, destroyed in flooding, for making it impossible to prove the true value of his assets. Then came more trouble. In 2015, he pleaded guilty to obstructing federal tax laws. He received 3 years of probation and was ordered to repay nearly $1 million in back taxes. For someone who had built a career around challenging authority, reality proved much harder to outrun than image. But even then, Coe still found surprising ways to reinvent himself. In the late 1990s, he began working with Dimebag Darrell, the legendary guitarist from Pantera. Together they blended outlaw country with heavy metal in a project called Rebel Meets Rebel. The album wasn't released until 2006, 2 years after Darrell's tragic death on stage, giving the music an even deeper emotional weight. Coe also collaborated with Kid Rock, contributing songwriting that introduced his work to a younger audience. Even as many believed his best years were behind him, he continued finding new listeners in unexpected places. His personal life remained just as eventful. Over the years, he married 6 times. His final marriage, to Kimberly Hastings in 2010, lasted until his death. Through every controversy, every financial struggle, and every health scare, music remained the one constant. But eventually, even that journey had to end. By the 2020s, David Allan Coe was still touring and embracing the outlaw image that had defined him for decades. Collaborations with younger artists showed he still had a place in modern country music. Then, in April 2026, he entered a hospital in Daytona Beach and was moved into intensive care. He died there on April 29 at 5 o'clock in the evening. Later reports identified pneumonia as a contributing factor, though his family never publicly explained the full details of his final illness. Once again, privacy surrounded one of the biggest moments of his life. Artists across country music honored his influence, praising a man who helped shape the outlaw movement, whether people agreed with everything he stood for or not. In the end, David Allan Coe left behind more than songs. He left behind a puzzle. Some parts of his life were undeniably true. Others were carefully crafted stories that grew into legends of their own. He survived prison, poverty, controversy, illness, financial collapse, and countless personal battles. Yet perhaps his greatest creation was the character he invented and lived every day. Even now, it's difficult to know where David Allan Coe ended and the myth began. And maybe that's exactly how he wanted it. Long after the music fades, one question still lingers. When history remembers David Allan Coe, will it remember the man, or the legend he spent a lifetime creating?